The Aegean Sea. Deep blue waves, but the air was cold as steel. The Hellenic Navy task group, consisting of a Hydra-class destroyer and 2 fast missile corvettes, was patrolling near Lesbos Island. This was a historical flashpoint, where confrontation was almost instinctual. From the east, a Turkish frigate, painted combat gray, deliberately closed in. It was not just provocation. The Turkish warship locked its fire control radar onto the Greek destroyer, an act of war that could not be ignored. Immediately, from the Turkish coastline, the order to fire was issued. There was no final warning. No diplomatic signal. Launch Atmaca. Atmaca. Missiles. Saturation attack. For Atmaca. Atmaca. Anti-ship cruise missiles were fired from mobile coastal launchers. They flew sea-skimming, floating the coastal terrain in the chaos of maritime traffic. To conceal their signature, their subsonic speed was more than enough. On the Greek Hydra-class destroyer, the alarm shrieked. Missiles! Anti-ship missiles incoming, bearing northwest. 15 seconds to impact. The Hydra captain roared, ordering an emergency turn. The RIM 7C Sparrow, anti-air missile system, was loaded into the launcher. The naval battle had erupted, not due to an accident, but due to deliberate escalation. The Greek Hydra-class destroyer banked hard, engines roaring, trying to dodge the Atmaca missile wave. The fast missile corvettes fired RAM, rolling airframe missile, interceptors, creating a desperate wall of fire. The Greek close-in defense was overwhelmed by the number of missiles. 4 Atmaca missiles broke through the fire net. The first missile slammed straight into the main radar mast of the Hydra destroyer. The explosion tore apart the entire superstructure. Molten metal and electronic fragments flew everywhere. The captain and the entire command staff were annihilated instantly. The ship lost command and was completely radar blind. The second and third struck the engine room. The explosion blew out the fuel lines. Hellfire erupted from within, spreading rapidly into the compartments. Seawater flooded in violently. The crew was severely wounded by burns and pressure. Their screams were drowned out by the roar of the fire. The proud Hydra destroyer stalled in the Aegean Sea, listing heavily to one side, trailing thick black smoke. Immediately, the Turkish Ada-class corvette, which had been hiding behind a small island, charged out. The Turkish corvette didn't need anti-ship missiles. It used its Odo Malara 76mm naval gun to finish off the target. A barrage of high-explosive shells tore up the paralyzed Hydra destroyer. Rounds pierced the hull, detonating small munition stores. Steel was torn. Blood and seawater sprayed from dozens of holes. The Greek destroyer began to sink rapidly. The Hydra-class destroyer had sunk, and the Turkish Ada-class corvette was preparing for the next attack. But it was time for Greece to return fire with overwhelming land power. Along the Greek coastline and forward islands, multiple launch rocket system, MLRS, and self-propelled artillery batteries opened fire simultaneously. The roar of rockets and shells tore the Aegean sky apart. Dozens of rockets sped toward the Turkish coastline and the operating warships. The target was not just the warship, but the Atmaca missile launchers that had fired. The Turkish corvettes, including the Ada-class ship, immediately switched to air defense mode. They launched RAM, rolling airframe missile, interceptor missiles, and used their Odo Malara 76mm naval guns to create a desperate wall of fire. Some rockets were shot down, but the firepower was overwhelming. The first rocket struck a Turkish coastal radar station. The explosion turned the building to dust, killing the entire operating crew. Immediately after, the second rocket artillery volley poured down. A rocket struck the fuel depot of the Atmaca missile system. A colossal fireball erupted, spreading rapidly along the coastline. Turkish soldiers who couldn't escape were burned alive or crushed by the shockwave. Blood and charred earth splattered everywhere. The Turkish Ada-class corvette was struck by rocket shrapnel. Although it didn't sink, it was heavily damaged, forced to withdraw immediately to avoid further attack. The Greek artillery counterattack was brutal and devastating, temporarily repelling the Turkish Navy's incursion. After the artillery barrage, the Turkish Ada-class corvette, heavily damaged, turned to withdraw, leaving behind the Greek fast missile corvettes. Vengeance made the war unstoppable. A Greek Rusin-class missile corvette with superior speed immediately gave chase. This ship carried the Otomalara 76mm naval gun and exocet missiles. The Rusen captain decided on close quarters combat. Close in on target. Maintain distance not exceeding 1 nautical mile. Navalgungsfire. The Rusen charged into the hot zone, where the smoking Ada corvette was. The 76mm naval gun began to rain fire onto the Turkish ship's flank. High explosive rounds tore apart the Ada's stealth armor. Metal warped. Fierce flames erupted. The Ada, despite its paralyzed command system, still returned fire with its main cannon. The two warships fired directly at each other at close range, turning the sea surface into a firestorm hell. The Rusin's hull was struck by multiple shells. Its bow was heavily breached, seawater flooding in violently. The Greek crew had to fight half submerged and half ablaze. While the two ships dueled, another Greek fast missile boat unit detected an older Turkish escort vessel trying to approach for rescue. They immediately launched exocet cruise missiles. The exocet missiles struck the Turkish escort. The explosion was annihilating. The small ship was torn into fragments of metal and wood. The bodies of the crew were thrown into the air, raining down into the sea. Blood and diesel oil spread widely on the water. The close-range naval battle turned into mutual slaughter. Both sides paid a heavy price in steel and blood. On the surface of the Aegean Sea, warships of both Greece and Turkey were severely damaged. But the true battlefield of this confrontation lay deep beneath the ocean. From a secret naval base, the Turkish Navy Rice-class sub received the order to deploy. They were equipped with advanced electronic warfare and heavy torpedoes. Their target, hunting the Greek Papanikolaos class sub, secretly maneuvering to support the surface fleet. The Turkish sub dove deep, accelerating to maximum speed. They didn't need to use active sonar. The explosions and metal tearing sounds from the naval battles on the surface were the perfect cover for their movement. The sonar officer on the Greek Papanikolaos class sub screamed, "High-speed engine noise detected. Enemy submarine. They are right here, bearing 340. The Greek captain ordered a deeper dive while launching acoustic decoys to mislead the enemy. The Greek Type 2 4 Type 24 torpedoes were loaded into the tubes, ready to return fire. The underwater duel erupted. The Turkish Rice-class sub-launched two Akia torpedoes, heavy torpedoes guided by active sonar. The two torpedoes raced off, tracking the target. The Greek sub maneuvered frantically to evade, but the Akia torpedoes were too fast and too smart. The first torpedo pierced the outer hull of the Papanikolaos. The explosion warped the hull. Icy seawater sprayed straight into the torpedo compartment. The crew was killed instantly by the water pressure. The second torpedo struck the main engine room. The shockwave destroyed the propulsion system. The Papanikolaos class sub lost all propulsion. It began free-falling into the abyss, dragging its crew into eternal darkness. After the Greek Papanikolaos class submarine was sunk, the Turkish task force was relentless. On the surface, the remaining Greek warships, Rusen class, missile corvette, were moving chaotically, trying to rescue wounded sailors from the previous clashes. But the Turkish Ada class corvette, which had retreated after the Greek artillery counterattack, returned. It was fully loaded with Atmaca anti-ship missiles. Turkey needed no warning. The Ada-class ship launched a new volley of Atmaca missiles. The subsonic missiles, designed to fly close to the surface, sped off at high velocity, aiming straight at the dispersed Rusin ships. On the Rusin, the crew had just rescued some wounded comrades, taking off their armor. The missile alarm shrieked deafeningly again. The Rusen ships accelerated to maximum speed, launching radar chaff and heat flares, trying to escape. But it was too late. 3 Atmaca. Missiles struck one Rusen ship, The explosion was annihilating. The small hull was completely torn apart. A colossal fireball erupted, engulfing the entire ship. The bodies of the sailors were torn to pieces, splattering into the air. Blood, diesel oil, and small metal fragments rained down on the sea. The remaining Rusin class ship, severely shocked, was forced to abort the rescue mission and flee at maximum possible speed toward the Greek coastline, leaving behind hundreds of comrades floating in the sea of fire. Turkey did not pursue. The naval battle had achieved its destructive objective. After annihilating the submarine and surface warships of Greece, the Turkish naval forces switched to salvage and recovery mode and blockade of rescue efforts. The two Ada-class corvettes, despite damage, immediately returned to the combat zone, focusing naval gunfire on any rescue boats or patrol aircraft that dared to approach. The Turkish Otomalara 26mm naval gunfire tore up the sea surface, creating giant water columns. Although the Greek corvettes were sunk, but Turkey's will for revenge was absolute. Any rescue attempt was considered a new act of aggression. The Greek Seahawk helicopter squadron, dispatched from Rhodes Island, was forced to circle outside, helplessly watching their comrades abandoned amidst the sea of fire and cold water. The Turkish forces concentrated on recovering radar fragments and encryption gear from the sunken Hydra-class destroyer and Rausen class that sank. They did not bother with the hundreds of floating bodies. Blood and oil stained the Aegean Sea red under the dim light of the dying fires. This was a deliberate purge. Turkey didn't just fight for sea control. They fought to annihilate Greece's entire naval capability. As dawn began to break, it illuminated a hellish scene on the Aegean Sea. The naval battle had ended with the complete annihilation of the Greek Navy. The Hydra-class destroyer and Rausen class missile corvette had sunk completely. Their Papanikolaos class submarine was also put out of action. The sea surface was a giant watery graveyard. Hundreds of bodies of Greek sailors, charred black or crushed by torpedo pressure, floated aimlessly among metal fragments, oil slicks, and spent flares. The stench of death and diesel oil was thick in the air. The Turkish Navy had won an absolute victory. They had proven their ability to annihilate the enemy's entire fleet in a preemptive, swift, and brutal attack. However, this incident shook the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Two member nations had engaged in a war of annihilation. NATO's worst diplomatic and military crisis had officially begun, with superpowers forced to choose sides, in a confrontation with no victor.